Every major city in Canada is home to a tent city. Calgary, Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, Ottawa, Halifax, Hamilton, Edmonton, Abbotsford, and Kingston all have tent cities. These makeshift cities are growing in number and in population. More people are now sleeping under nylon, tarps, and canvas than at any time since the Great Depression. The numbers are staggering. More than 35,000 people on any given day sleep in improvised camps. And those people who end up living in encampments find it remarkably challenging to move into a solid structure. Up to 23% of people stay where they are with nowhere to go. How did we get to this point? First, COVID forced shelters to limit the number of people in a facility. Add in a steady loss of affordable housing options. For every new affordable unit built, 15 were lost between 2011 and 2016. And 46,000 units disappeared between 2016 and 2021. Now, an increase in asylum seekers and international students puts more pressure on a limited housing supply. Toxic drugs and mental health put more people on the street. Politicians, from the Prime Minister to the Housing Minister and Immigration Ministers, are uncertain about how to address this crisis. Premiers and mayors are also at a loss. Hello, I'm Stuart McNish, and you're listening to Conversations Live. Conversations Live is a long-form public affairs dialogue series addressing the big issues of our time. For each episode, we bring together subject matter experts for a deep conversation designed to provide you with information that helps you make more informed decisions. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome to Conversations Live, Tent City Nation. Today, this event is being produced and netcast from the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish First Nations, who have lived on and continue to call these lands home. Ossium. The legendary Canadian rock band Nickelback wrote and performs When We Stand Together. There is a message in the song that I believe is appropriate for our panel discussion on tent cities in Canada today. I say this after reflecting on a comment from one of our panelists, Jean-Pierre Poulin, who noted in Postmedia's Tent City Nation long read series by journalist Andrew Duffy. Monsieur Poulin said, homelessness is everybody's responsibility, and it's nobody's responsibility. That's the problem. So in the words of Nickelback's Ryan Peake, Mike and Chad Kruger, and Joey Moyes, when we stand together, how can we fall asleep at night when something's clearly wrong? When we can feed a starving world with what we throw away, but all we serve are empty words that always taste the same. We watch it happen over there and then just turn it off. As the song notes, we see it and then just turn it off. And when we turn away, we treat those who call the street home as though they are invisible. Well, they're not invisible, and their presence is seen by more and more of us all the time, and they are affecting us. In Vancouver in 2008, then Mayor Gregor Robertson promised to end homelessness. When he declared his intention, the city's homeless population was 2,100 people. Last year, more than 4,800 people lived on the streets and parks in Vancouver, and it is a problem that stretches from coast to coast. This morning, the Vancouver Parks Board announced it is seeking shelter to house people living in the tent city at Crab Park. This is the waterfront inner harbor site that has been home to a number of tent cities over the years. They get cleared out, and then they reappear. There are no easy solutions to tent cities, and there is no agreement on how to untie the seemingly intractable problem of homelessness. Today, this is our panel topic, and we have a remarkable panel. Joining us from Ottawa is Katie Burkholder-Harris, the Executive Director of Alliance to End Homelessness Ottawa. Jean-Pierre Poulin, the CEO and founder of DevCore Group of Companies, and he is joining us from Gatineau, Quebec. Adam Zivo is a political columnist with the National Post, and he joins us from Toronto. And Rob Turnbull, the president and CEO of Street to Home Foundation in Vancouver, is joining us from our studio here. As well, Scott Aitchison, the Conservative Party Shadow Minister for Housing and the Member of Parliament for Parry Sound Muskoka, is joining us. I'd like to note that he is the only political figure that responded to our invitation. All others across all political stripes, national, provincially, and even at the city level, either turned away or didn't respond. So, Scott, thank you for stepping up. And housing advocate Marie-Josée Houle had agreed to join us, and then at the last minute withdrew after it was confirmed that Shadow Minister Aitchison would be on the panel. Now, just before we get started, I want to make a note to all of you who are watching that if you have a question that you'd like to pose, please go to slido.com and enter the password conversations. Sean Hall, our Slido master, will be receiving your questions and bringing them forward to us. Now, we won't be able to get to all of them, but we can see them and I will be reviewing them, and your questions will help to inform me about topics and questions that I'll be posing to our panel. So, to further set the stage, here's Mario Canseco of Research Co., who just conducted a poll for us about opinions on homelessness and how we move forward. Samaya, can you please roll Mario's video?
Just over 3 in 5 Canadians regard homelessness as a major issue in the place where they live. More than 2/3 of residents of British Columbia and Ontario feel this way, while the numbers are lower in all other regions of the country. Canadians aged 55 and over are more likely to brand the current state of affairs as a major problem than their counterparts aged 35 to 54 and aged 18 to 34. Just over 2/3 of Canadians say that homelessness has increased in the last 3 years, including at least 7 in 10 residents of British Columbia, Atlantic Canada, and Ontario. There is a significant gender gap on this question. Almost 3 in 4 women say that homelessness is on the rise, while just over 3 in 5 men feel the same way. When asked about the root causes of homelessness in the country, Canadians place 2 issues at the top of the list: a lack of affordable housing and addiction and mental health issues. Fewer Canadians believe poverty and inequality, or a bad economy and unemployment, are to blame a great deal for the current situation. About 1 in 4 take a different view, citing personal actions and decisions as well as family trauma and emotional trauma as the main reasons for homelessness. At least 3 in 5 Canadians believe that homelessness across the country can be tackled by increasing mental health support, increasing temporary housing options, and offering incentives to developers to focus on delivering affordable units. Support is also high for using tax money to build units to house homeless residents and changing zoning laws to allow for more units on standard lots. The notion of municipal governments dismantling tent cities is endorsed by fewer than half of Canadians. For Conversations Live, I'm Mario Canseco from Research Co.
Thank you, Mario. Now to our panel. Scott, I want to start with you. How can we possibly find a way forward if we can't even come together completely for a robust and full panel discussion like this one that seeks to find a coordinated solution? What happens when we can't, in the words of Nickelback, stand together?
Well, I think we can stand together, but it requires leadership, and that's sorely lacking. It's like Jean Paul said, it's everybody's responsibility and nobody's responsibility, and everyone wants to point fingers, and everyone thinks that they've got the idea. But the fact of the matter is, we need leadership at the national level to work with provinces and municipalities to create solutions. And it's important to know the root causes, and I think that the research presented actually is reasonably accurate. It's a combination of factors. It's been brewing for decades and has gotten acutely worse in the last 4 or 5 years. But we have to acknowledge the problem for starters and the root causes of it, and then work together to enact solutions. And those solutions start with reducing the cost to build homes in general. There's a supply and demand issue with housing, and affordable housing particularly. Our demand is too high and our supply is too low. So, we have to reduce the cost to get things built, the timelines it takes to get things built. And then we also have to take a real serious look at homelessness specifically and and treat mental health and addictions as health issues, not as crime issues, and address those situations. Adam is the expert on this. Frankly, I've learned a lot from the work and the research he's done and the writing he's done. And so, we need to be honest with ourselves about what policy prescriptions have not worked, and set aside the ideology of live and let live. We need to support people. We need to get them off of their addictions. We need treatment. We need housing. We need, in many cases, when it comes to the housing file, we need government to get out of the way.
Katie, I'd like to go to you because I know that you've got a really good handle on, what are contributing factors that have brought us to this point. And it looks like there's a couple of different stages sort of in the history of the country that have created an environment where homelessness just seems to be on the rise. How far do we have to go back to understand the roots? And then what in particular has happened over the last 4 or 5 years that has accelerated the number of people that we're seeing living on the street?
Yeah, I'm actually really glad to have seen the poll that talked about what are the root causes. Lack of affordable housing was the number one piece, because that is a shift in terms of the conversation that's been happening the last number of years. A lot of the time we do put it on personal actions. And really, when you look at the 70s and 80s, we did not have mass homelessness in this country. We have about 300,000 people experiencing homelessness a year, and I suspect that number is actually much higher. But it really was when the Canadian government was building 20,000 units of government or social housing and funding nonprofits to be able to build housing for people who really did have very little income. And when you create that kind of catching people who otherwise would be homeless, you also create balance in the rest of the housing market. And so at that time, we had about 10% of our housing stock was social housing, and that seemed to create enough balance within the market to be able to actually be affordable for everyone. So I think, there was also issues around deinstitutionalization and people who were staying in psychiatric institutions. Those were closed down in the 80s, and that's a piece of this. But in a functional housing system, you don't become homeless because of a crisis. And the majority of people who have substance use or who have mental health issues, they're housed, the vast majority. And when you look at the research, about 20%, 15 to 20% of folks who are homeless have severe mental health challenges, trauma, all those pieces. But the remainder don't need as much support. And I think that's a bit of a myth when we talk about these things. We have to look at the system, not just personal challenges that people may face.
Well, Jean-Pierre, you decided that it was not just nobody's responsibility. You stepped up. What prompted you? First of all, explain for us what it is that you did, because you have given people livable shelters in Ottawa through this past winter. Explain what you did and why. What was your motivation?
So by a cold Sunday morning of November, I decided to get 8 coffees as opposed to 1 coffee at Tim Hortons, and to go and sit down with them in their campground and understand their reality. It all started there, and we have false perception of what those people are going through sometimes, and just sitting down with them, understand that they need a place to sleep. With security, they need to be able to wash themselves, wash their clothing, and they need to be sleeping in a warm place where it's secure. So that was pretty basic needs that they needed to do and that they needed. And what we've done is we met with the mayor of the city at that time, and very quickly she responds that she's behind the initiative of setting up tents, but organized tent in a place where it's basically fenced, and that we have security, and that we can actually get them to agree on a code of life. And this was really the first step that has changed, changed the game here.
Yeah, but Jean-Pierre, also talk about what else you did. You went out and raised money. You built out this environment so that the people who were there weren't without services. You went the extra mile.
Yeah, we did. Actually, I feel that homeless is a responsibility of real estate, the real estate industry in general. Like, it's too easy to say it's the provincial government or it's the city's responsibility or it's the federal government. Like, whose responsibility is it really? It's a real estate issue at the base, so it should be dealt by real estate leaders of each community. And then, so that's what we've done. We asked one of our friends at the restaurant. He actually gave us this cocktail invitation to the leaders of industry, and we're supposed to raise $200,000 to with a budget, to set up winter tent and basically heaters and heated blankets. And it happened. We actually raised $350,000, and we used some of the extra money to hire our own street workers. And we hire one person that had 33 years of experience, because we're in real estate, so we don't really understand the issue of the street. But she did. Nancy Martineau did an awesome job with Annie Castonguay from Les Cicaux. And then we worked with the city. It's a city, the private sector, the health sector, and the community people on the street, like the community organization. We all work together, and then it works. And we've done sometime in real estate, we think we can do great things, right? Like I'm now a co-owner of the Ottawa Senator with Michael and Lauer, and it's great. But never, ever before I was have the opportunity to participate in something that actually saved life. And we did twice this year. We saved 2 people from having overdose. And we also, every morning that I walked off my house, even if we say we had a mild winter, well, what's a mild winter? -5 is still way too cold to be sleeping outside without any protection. So I was really happy of the turnout, and then that everybody came together. So it was great.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Adam, you've been writing about the situation, and you've been looking at the housing market and homelessness in particular. Give us a sense of where you think we're at right at the moment and how you'd like to see us move forward.
Well, I think that there is a lack of investment into housing, and I actually broadly agree with many of the things that Katie said. I think that we fail to address the underlying reasons why homelessness exists. I think that we need to have more public investment into affordable housing. I think that there is a clear correlation between how much public housing we build and how much housing we build in general and the levels of homelessness that we see in our cities. I also agree with what Aitchison said. I think that we also have to let government get out of the way when it comes to building market rate housing, because that's also an important part of the solution. I think we need to bring in different solutions from different parts of the political spectrum and realize that many of these solutions are compatible. People often lock themselves in to this idea that you can support either one or the other, but really you can do both. Now, on top of that, not only do we need to address the root causes of homelessness, we have to manage the impact that it has on certain communities. Because the communities that are going to be hosting the largest and most dangerous homeless encampments are not middle-class communities. These are usually low-income communities that are inhabited by Canadians who are unable to advocate for themselves, usually because they're new immigrants who lack the language skills and media and political connections to make their needs known. And I think that it is, in a sense, morally appalling that you have low-income working poor Canadians who do not have any safe space to enjoy themselves in public and don't have backyards like many middle-class Canadians. And they are, in a sense, erased by this narrative that concerns about crime and encampments is, in a sense, a war against the poor. So I guess in a way to summarize that, I think we have to be cognizant of the needs of the working poor and realize that poverty is not synonymous with encampments and that we have to find a way to fuse all of these different solutions together.
I agree with you. Rob, just before I come to you, I've got a clip from Dr. Julian Summers, who heads up the Simon Fraser University's Center for Mental Health and Addictions. This is from an interview that I did with him a couple of years ago. And, he's really pointing out that we're talking about people who have opportunities to to go back to work, to contribute, like have lives that give them much greater comfort and enjoyment. Samaya, can you run that clip? And then Rob, I want to come to you to talk to you about what you're doing to address the very needs and in a manner that Dr. Summers has laid out.
When we interview people who meet these criteria of, on average, 10 years homeless, struggling with very serious psychological symptoms alongside addictions, they have an average of about 10 criminal sentences, and they've worked in the past. About 60% have worked continuously for a year in the past. Over 90% would like to resume paid work. And when we look around the world at what's possible in terms of recovery, the figures from other countries, well, countries outside of North America, illustrate that when normal practice involves supporting people, say, diagnosed with schizophrenia, to live their entire lives in community settings, in their own homes, the opportunities for recovery, meaning people who once met criteria for schizophrenia now no longer meet criteria, are much, much greater. What we've found is the most useful way to engage them in their own recovery is wherever possible to support their agency and choices. They would like to become neighbors. They would like to establish themselves as citizens in so-called normal neighborhoods. Now, this is not every single person, but there is international research on the preferences of people who are currently homeless and struggling with mental illness, and about 90% have a strong preference for independent market housing. We no longer need to anticipate providing lifelong care to people who are struggling at a given point with serious mental illnesses and addictions. We need to expect that many will recover to a point where competitive employment and a substantial step down in the services that they require is likely, and then give them that opportunity. That's really our what we've learned over these ensuing decades is our long-term best play, and it happens to accord with what people say they want.
Well, and it also happens to accord quite closely with what you at Street to Home are doing. Rob, give us a little bit of a sense of what is the mandate of Street to Home and why it's working.
Okay, so Street to Home has a three-pronged approach. One is try to figure out where the gaps are in the current system. It's tough to say system because you're talking about housing, legal, you're talking about health, employment, and those aren't really connected as a system. But if you take a look at where there are gaps, we want to bring innovative evidence-based initiatives. They're going to fill that gap and be compelling to the individuals that, this is going to help them set a goal, get the supports they need to move on with their lives. I agree with Julian. There are many unmet needs, and I think housing is just one of those needs. So we've created a graphic called the Street to Home Stool to just identify the various domains that you really have to deal with or at least offer supports in if the person is going to become a thriving citizen. So just briefly, we start with a seat cushion. That's your safety and sense of belonging. And that safety is very broad: personal, gender, Indigenous, spiritual. And then you have the four legs of the stool. So housing is only one of those legs. You have employment and training, you have legal and advocacy, and then you have health care. Very complex for people that have spent any amount of time in the street. Not only will they have physical health issues, and they'll likely may have auditory, dental, eye issues. They'll also may have mental health challenges or addiction challenges. So we try to figure out what initiative the private sector can take the risk on and bring. We don't own or operate anything. We find a trustworthy nonprofit that's going to carry this and sustain it. The second thing we do, just listening to everyone, is we try to optimize the existing housing. We have, depending on how you define it, about 7,000 supportive housing units in Vancouver. And so you'll, like Julian said, people will reach a point where they want to move on to independent housing. And so some challenges with that. How do they find affordable housing. Just the cost. When you're living in our supportive housing, not ours, but Street Home funding too, you have a bed, you have a kitchen table, you have a couch, you have a pantry. When you move, you've got to buy all those furnishings. So we created a STEP program. Private sector said, we can continue to fund building these units, which when we started, costed about $150,000 to $200,000. They're now $500,000 to $600,000 for a studio unit. And incidentally, it's probably the most expensive unit you can probably build, as opposed to larger shared units. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. But
you also, in your model, are providing the services that support people moving towards independence.
We do.
And so therefore, how important is that component?
Well, when we've done surveys and interviews, people are overwhelmed just with the system of services, how to find a service or support that's a good match for them. And so one of the things we did was we created a life intentions action planner, and it'll help folks set a goal and then look through a companion guide to services, over 600 support services that are free in Vancouver, to find that best fit service. And they may want to find a service that caters to immigrants and refugees or seniors or youth or Indigenous. So you have to find that best fit service to be able to move on. If you're going to evaluate the success of a homeless service system, that's it. How many people are engaging the services you provide, setting a goal, and moving on with their lives?
Yeah. We'll come back to this more because I want to touch on what Finland has done, copying a Canadian model. But first of all, I want to go to Slido. Sean, you've got a question coming in here from City Councillor in Montreal.
Yes, there is. There's a couple of questions, actually. Benoit Lagavin, as a city councillor with Montreal, says, in Montreal, the city owns 79 buildings or pieces of land that are unused and require renovations. These buildings could get minimal upgrades and be opened to different types of homeless clienteles. And then building on that, the Quebec provincial government is willing to pay for operations for supports on these sites. But why is the Canadian government not investing directly in Montreal's buildings to renovate them?
Scott, do you have an answer to that?
Well, if I was going to be cynical, I'd tell you it's probably not a good enough photo op for these guys. They're interested in photo ops, but not the follow through. I don't have an answer for you, but this is the kind of stuff that makes complete sense. It's vacant public land. It's got provincial supports to run the wraparound supports that are absolutely crucial, and you need a federal partner. But this makes complete sense to me. You've heard it from every one of these panelists that we need everyone coming together in real leadership, and that's what's lacking right now. But that makes complete sense to me.
Jean-Pierre.
Yeah. Like right beside the Gertin Arena, which was the campground and where we built the organized camp, there was a building right next to it, and it could have been, reopened and retrofit there, but there's a complexity as putting all of the people in one building. It's very, very difficult to manage, as they all have different needs. They all need different type of help, and gathering them in big building, we decided it was going to be very problematic. So we opt for the option of everybody have their own home, like their own temporary tent, with security at the front, and a code of life. So actually turned better than we expected. Yeah. We had zero death and zero fire in those, and before that it was like a fire every week and a death every month. So it actually worked.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, though, that you say don't move them all just into one building because it happens to be there. That's one of Dr. Julian Summers' points. You don't just create some sort of warehousing facility. Make sure that people can be moved into the kind of housing along with the support services that they require. Adam, when you read or hear that comment from the Montreal City Councillor, what's your response to that? Because you're paying very close attention to this.
Well, I think as you mentioned earlier, 48 Thomas Routine it's not production, but everyone into, a single building. Other people who are fresh off the street, still dealing with trauma, and still often dealing with addiction. So Dr. Summers conducted one of the largest mathematical trials ever done, where he was able to illustrate that if he simply scattered people, market-rate housing, and integrated them into quote-unquote normal society, got better outcomes, actually got support. Because if you put everyone in the same building, what's going to happen is that, like, imagine you're trying to quit addiction, and everyone around you is still using, we're still struggling to use. You're setting people up to fail. And so when we see, for example, these solutions where you have an empty lot or a vacant building, and you just think that that is the silver bullet, or for housing people, we have to realize that that might not be the case. And that might seem like the simpler option and the more straightforward option, and in some cases, the cheaper option. But I think that taking a more scattered approach might be the wiser option here.
Katie, the work that you're doing in Ottawa, you're actually helping to bring a variety of agencies together so that they can work to provide that suite of options for people who are wanting to move away from the homeless situation. What can we learn? I know this is a bit of a transition, but what can we learn from the experience in Finland, where they now seem to have actually succeeded in ending homelessness?
Yeah, so I really appreciate these two pieces being together, because we wrote a report on land policy and how we can actually use that to end homelessness. And we also brought the Finns to Canada in January of this year. So we spent a lot of time with them. And I think one thing that in this conversation that feels like it might be a bit muddy, and it always is because housing is complex, but there's a spectrum of housing. And when you look at that spectrum, when I say social or nonprofit housing, it simply means there's no profit motive. That looks like a lot of different things, but that the provider is not making any profit. The housing is a social good. It's permanently affordable. That also can look like a mixed market model. And to be honest, nobody, even nonprofits, are building what we saw in the 70s and 80s, where it was a large high rise, all with folks experiencing low incomes. It is not that model anymore. It's always mixed, mostly because you can't even make the pro forma work. You can't actually make the costs work to only have people paying, rent geared to their income. So whenever we're talking about nonprofit housing now, a lot of that usually means a mixed integrated model with different, income levels, different communities, unless it's supportive housing, which is often nonprofit as well, but that's specifically for people who have high needs. I'd really encourage us to lean into the data to make sure that we're building based on actual need. I think there's an assumption that all people experiencing homelessness need that type of housing. And I really appreciate exactly what Adam's saying. The model is scattered site. Provide people with income support, absolutely, to afford their rental unit, provide the supports they need if they have high needs. Some people have, don't want it or don't need it after a certain period of time. That is absolutely evidence-based. But I think especially when it comes to the Finland model, they had about 35 to 40 people. Like, I don't even think there were more than 35 people in that type of housing where it was supportive. There were staff on site sort of 24/7. It was quite small. And it was in order to do exactly that, to keep people connected, to be, focused on recovery and supporting them to do what they needed to do or wanted to do in their life to thrive. But the model that we have here, there are a lot of places where, and it's older, but it's a larger supportive housing spot where a lot of people have complex challenges they're dealing with. And totally agree, like, that's not the environment that anyone thrives in. So yeah, I think there's pieces to this that let's just be super clear on our terms. Because nowadays, if you're looking at building a big sort of nonprofit, it is a mixed market approach. And I think that's good. It's good for communities.
How important, I'm going to go to Adam and also to Scott, that we ensure that people who are in situations where they need financial support, that we're actually giving them an adequate, livable amount of money. And I know that for many people, they go, what? Like, we can't just keep giving money away. But what's the cost to us if we're not supporting people properly? Adam, from your perspective, have we done a disservice to people that forces them out onto the street because we're not supporting them with the financial resources that they need? And then, Scott, I'll come to you.
Well, I think it's critical to provide a certain level of financial support in the beginning to help people transition off the street, because how do we expect people to recover otherwise? At the same time, I'm skeptical of some people who would want to use that argument to, for example, argue for indefinite UBI solutions. Because when we see people who have recovered from addiction, an important part of recovery is gaining some sense of meaning and structure in one's life, and that's often tied to employment. So I think a reasonable solution here would be generous income support for a few months at first, coupled with support systems that help people get employed again and give them a sense of meaning, and then slowly weaning them off that income support so they can transition back to a quote unquote normal life.
Scott, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree with what Adam's just said. I think this is about health. It's about independence. It's about living, a full, productive, and healthy life. And we need to help people achieve that. There's some people with greater needs than others, but it's not about keeping them in treatment and care forever. That's that's expensive and not good for them. Frankly, we need people to instead of continue perpetuating a cycle of addiction or a cycle of mental illness. We need to make sure that we're giving them the supports they need to live a full life.
Rob, from in your model, how important is it that each of the individuals that are going through the Street to Home program also have the financial resources that they need to be able to navigate their way through each week?
Well, I think we have to focus on just the differences among individuals. We did some work on navigation centers in the United States, and we actually built a business case, but we couldn't get folks to bite into it. But in navigation center, you're bringing the entire homeless camp inside, and you work one-on-one with each individual to figure out what is it that you actually need. Some of them, it may be supportive housing and those extensive services. Other people may need institutional care. Other people may need a time-limited rent sub to get back on their feet. Others would take advantage of our Homeward Bound program. They'll self-identify and say, hey, I've got housing in Sault Ste. Marie and I've got supports, can't get there, and we'll make sure they get there. So, and some people, it could be a relationship breakdown. They had to move, and so they need to get re-engaged in the employment market. So it's dealing one by one and making the best use of government and private sector resources to do that.
So I want to come back to just one point that Adam brought up, and the idea that that we have a scattered housing approach. Is this reflective of the approach that you have, that you're not just bringing everybody together in the same center? And how important is that?
Well, so Street to Home, I think, has contributed to 1,300 units and 23 buildings across the city of Vancouver. For the most part, those buildings were congregate at that point. And I think what we've learned over the last 15 years is that you do get better results with mixed income tenancy. And so we've actually influenced some of the builds that have come along the way since then. But, some of the challenges with those buildings are that it's a little bit crazy because it's tough for the folks because the workload management issue. So some of the programs we've put in place have helped those support workers. So we have a recovery cafe, for example, where people can actually go during the day, which means it frees up the support workers' time to focus on more complex individuals. But at the recovery cafe, it's a generic recovery model. People can recover from homelessness, unemployment, addictions, mental health. It's a great resource, not only for the supportive housing providers, but our emergency services, our outreach teams. It's a great way to make sure that there's a resource in place that's going to support these people so they aren't so dependent on their supportive housing. Just a different way of spinning it.
Mm. Jean-Pierre, I want to come to you in just a moment, but Sean, there's a question up here about NIMBYism, and I'd like you to present that in light of the idea that, yes, we want to have standard housing, but how do we make that happen? And Jean-Pierre, from your perspective, I'll just let Sean ask the question right now, and then I'll come back to you, okay?
Yeah. Thanks, Stuart. It's a question from Brianne. How can we work around NIMBYism, which has been affecting affordable housing opportunities in many areas, and how can we make affordable housing actually affordable?
So it's a little bit of a variation on a theme there, Jean-Pierre, but you talked about the fact that this is a responsibility of the housing sector, the real estate development industry. Do you run into challenges, though, when you say, yes, we want to make a portion of whatever it is that we're building out that's going to be accessible housing to people who are homeless or are in need of that kind of assistance? Because there is always a reaction.
Yeah, I think we have to look at at two different things. There's affordable, but there's also social. Affordable today and the programs that we know, they cannot afford. Like what they can afford is $300, $400, $500 per month. They can't afford $1,200, $1,400 like the affordable housing programs that we have now. So it has to be clearly defined between affordable and social, and maybe a dedicated program. But I think we have to look at real estate in a different way. First of all, it starts by who are the potential customers or tenants or rentals. Like, do we have a survey? Do we have a survey across Gatineau? And we did not before. We start getting a sense of how many people now are really homeless, but more specifically, what are their needs? Like, can they actually live as part of a bigger complex? And if it is, we build maybe a bigger complex with the money that we get as opposed to paying cash, an initiative of 20 units. Well, maybe we build 150 units. And maybe there's 20 that are really social. So people pay full rent on the regular units, but then there's 20 or 25 or 30 or 40 that actually has some people, like some street workers, that are going to visit them. And we're currently working with the city of Gatineau, with the CISO, to create those kinds of projects that can be really sustainable and could actually be profitable. There's nothing, I think we can use profitable projects to help them in a way where, well, first of all, if the city could put in place like a dollar program, like it used to be the church taking care of those people in the 50s and in the 60s, right? And the church are not paying tax. So I'm wondering, why are we charging tax to an organization that is like the GTMI, helping 50, 60 people at all times? They shouldn't be paying tax. And maybe, there's other initiative that can be done with CMHC longer term, maybe no CMHC fees. So we're actually talking with CMHC and those programs where there's a portion of the project that is actually devoted to the homeless.
Yeah, Adam, I know that you want to jump in here.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So when it comes to NIMBYism, I just want to say that the vast majority of NIMBY sentiments are irrational, right? We know NIMBYs who think that, for example, building a medium-sized apartment will destroy a neighborhood. At the same time, there is a kernel of rationality to some of their concerns when it comes to public safety. I think that when people see crime percolate around certain shelters or affordable housing projects, that they are very justified in being concerned that if similar projects show up in their neighborhood, they won't feel safe when they're walking out at night. And I think that if we want to take the steam out of NIMBY objections to affordable housing, it's important for us to take public safety seriously. I think that the more seriously we take public safety and the more we show that public disorder should not be allowed to percolate around these kinds of projects, the more of these kinds of projects can thrive in the future.
We have another question here, Sean, from Deborah Stokes. Can you put that forward? And then I want to get a reaction from all panelists.
Thanks, Stuart. What kind of policies could be put into place to get business and real estate more involved in solving the encampment issue? Is this a municipal, provincial, or federal level policy framework?
Scott, can I start with you? Yep.
You sure can. And I'll say off the top that the development industry, a lot of it is interested in this. And Jean-Pierre Poulin made a very excellent point about how you build these mixed-use buildings. I was just in Toronto a couple of weeks ago and visited a development that Tricon has done. 3 different buildings near the distillery district. It's 700 and something units, 30% of which are affordable. And of that 30%, some are affordable, some are, deeply affordable, 20% of market, that kind of thing. They're mixed within the building. They're not sort of over there in that tower. So what they've done is they've created a community of people at all levels of income, and they've also partnered with community agencies to provide the supports that some of the residents might need. They've got a number of accessible units for people with accessibility issues. And they were able to do this because of, number one, getting the land from the provincial government. It was underutilized land that needed to be restored. So the provincial government gave the land. CMHC actually approved a mortgage for the property, financing for the property that was below market. And they created these partnerships, and they've created these beautiful buildings. They're beautiful communities. And there are solutions, but we've got to get the cost down. CMHC is a painfully slow organization that everyone complains about. And the federal government and provincial governments do have land that we could make available as well. But the other issue, too, is that all too often, and goes back to the NIMBYism point as well, all too often, local municipalities add time and delays and costs and fees and charges under this notion that growth has to pay for growth. And I spent my life in municipal politics. I chaired the planning committee. I was a mayor, and I saw it over and over and over again where, something comes along, a proposal comes along that makes good sense, is good planning. Even the professional planners support it. But the neighbors show up and say, well, we don't like that because of this and because of that. And instead of addressing the legitimate concerns, councillors will back away and say, oh, these people vote for me. I've got to step back from this. And it creates more delays. And so this is the area where I say, government needs to come together and work with the private sector, but also we need to actually have a little less government, fewer of these processes, fewer of these public meetings. If we do planning ahead of time and preemptively, zone lands around transit, zone lands, in appropriate places, and upzone them to, require higher density in the appropriate areas, and then don't have series of rezoning meetings and hearings and fees and charges. This is the other way you get the cost down and make it possible to build literally the millions more units we need in this country.
Katie, I know that you are working to pull groups together so that there is a collective voice, and that there is an agreed upon set of principles or strategies. How important is it that federal, provincial, and municipal governments start to work with one another rather than developing policies that at times work against one another as we seek to address the challenges that people who are living under like the thinnest of shelters?
Are you asking me that? Sorry.
No, Katie. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear that. Absolutely, all levels of government obviously need to collaborate, and I really appreciate Jean-Pierre's comment at the beginning of, it's everyone and no one's responsibility. I'm going to complicate maybe everyone's answers by saying, yes, private sector is a key partner, and devil's in the details. And most of the agreements that I have seen that are getting approved at my council that CMHC programs have gone towards is that there is a limited term affordability agreement for government funding. So 10, 15, 20 years. And then the unit that was designated as affordable, and affordable by what standards is another big important question. And there's been good creative responses on that. But after that amount of time, it's no longer affordable. It's back on the market. And that, to me, is problematic. I think there's great examples of partnership like Dream LeBreton in my community, where there's a nonprofit partnering with a private developer. A number of those units are just going to be operated and owned by the nonprofit, permanently affordable, mixed into a full community. Great. That's the kind of model I would love to see. But I think as long as there are limits on how long things are affordable, we're kicking a crisis down the road. And I think on the zoning piece, I totally agree with Scott's point. And I was chatting with a home builder actually quite recently, a developer, who was talking about just the sense that, you have an approval for a project, and there's a lot of projects that have been approved in my community, and it's not being built because right now it's expensive to build. We have 5% interest rates, so it's very difficult to build. And on top of that, the accrual of the value of the land by not building is going to be extremely high. So you see this context where it makes business sense to not build. So I think we have to be realistic. The cost of housing right now is $2,200 a month for a one bedroom. As much as private sector, most people are going to live in the private sector, great. I do think we need long-term subsidies to support people with their rent, because I don't see that cost coming down anytime soon, even if we build and build and build. To your point at the beginning, Stuart, we lose 15-1 nationally. In my community, it's 31 units to every new one built. So even though we're building right now and doing our best to, it's not going to catch up with the gap we have. And the idea of taking people off of an affordable subsidy, not many people can afford $2,200 every single month on rent. And that's if you don't have dependents. That's just a one bedroom. So we have to be really clear-eyed about what people are actually paying and how disconnected that actually is from people's income.
This is, of course, a very complex topic, and there's layer upon layer upon layer of reasons why people wind up being in homeless situations, and all of us would like to see some sort of solution that is of benefit to the people who find themselves in those circumstances. But it's also a societal issue because we pay a price. We've got 10 minutes left, and what I'd like to do is just ask each of you, just for a couple of minute synopsis of what you think is the most important thing for people to think about, in a way of saying, okay, I have a greater understanding of where we're at and maybe where we can go, so that maybe we can get a little bit more harmony in voices as we try to develop a strategy moving forward. And Rob, I'd like to start with you, because you're having success in helping people transition from the street back into more independent living.
We are. I'd probably start with going back to some of the regulations, which I think should come provincially. We do have differences in municipalities in terms of the number of individuals who are unrelated who can live together. This morning, we've got the new rental.ca data that said the average one bedroom in Vancouver is $1,900. Well, we did come up during COVID, developers approached us and said, we need to get it incentivized for us to be able to build shared housing. And if you compare a massing of one bedrooms in one building with a massing of shared housing, you're going to find that you can get similar profits for the developers, but you're going to get the rents in the shared housing dropping between $70 and $800. And that's for a fully furnished unit. That's with cleaning once a week. But it all comes down to, who are those tenants? We call them chosen family pods, because you do want to know who you're living with. And I think there's a great scenario that I ran into when I first started. I met 3 individuals who met at a car park where they lived for years. And they popped by Tim Hortons, grabbed their coffee, and I said, why are you guys meeting here? Well, we lived here for years. The owner used to pop a cord out so we could listen to the ball game on our radio. But now we've been put in 3 separate buildings. So I get people to also reflect on the new Surgeon General's advisory that isolation and loneliness are huge. So I think we've got to come up with different models, different design models. Independent living in studios is going to work for some, give people a choice. Interdependent living, where people can support each other, is a whole nother option that really hasn't been explored in Canada.
Adam, can I go to you? Your thoughts on where you would like to see us go as we collectively try to address this very challenging situation?
Well, I think that if we want to produce a more nuanced and accurate ethical analysis of this crisis, we have to recognize the diversity of the populations involved. And so I'd referenced that earlier when I said that we need to understand that poverty and homelessness are not the same, and we have to understand the interests of the working poor are not necessarily the same as the interests of a small number of encampment residents. At the same time, one thing that hasn't come up yet is that we have to respect the diversity of the homeless population too. Not everyone lives in a large encampment. Many people live in smaller encampments which coexist peacefully with their neighbors. And I think that those encampments are fine. I see no issue with them. And that's very different from when we're talking about these larger encampments that become actual nexus of violence in their area. We also have to understand that encampments evolve over time. You can have an encampment which begins with people who are mostly downtrodden and respect their neighbors, and then in come in, these violent drug dealers who essentially take the encampment over. And until we start paying more attention to these dynamics and these nuances, I think that we'll have overly reductive moral frameworks when addressing this crisis, and that's not productive.
Do you think we can get there, Adam?
It's hard. I think a lot of people are very entrenched in the position.
Right. Jean-Pierre, well, what's your takeaway message from today that you want people, especially in your community, in the development community, what do you want them to take away from our discussion today?
I think the biggest thing is collaboration. We have to stop blaming one another. We have to work together. It's going to be multiple initiative. It's going to be different real estate product. It's going to be maybe a house, a container house that is going to be affordable for people that really wants to live just off the grid, and they don't want all those rules. So it's going to be different, like a mini houses that maybe has 8 people and 1 person going there daily, like a street worker. So it's going to be many different type of product and many initiative, but only one way is the collaboration. And as far as cost of, construction, it's not going to go down if we don't resolve this upstream. Like, it's created by the lack of trades and labor. And if we get busy again, regardless of any initiative by the government, if they give us more rebates or more, then we're just going to build it. The cost's going to go up because then we don't have sufficient trades. I was just in Dubai a few months ago, and Dubai offer visas, temporary visa for a few years, and they're actually sponsored by the construction company. So I was with one guy who's into forming, and I said, "How many employees do you have?" 35,000. So he says, if we have another 2 or 3 building, we can go to 50,000 in 2 months. Recruiting, and like that's fueling over there the construction, and they're like amongst the biggest building in the world. We have one building in Canada that is going to be over 100-story. It's been in the ground for 6 years, downtown Toronto. I'm not even sure it's going to get finished, without going through a couple of cycles. So it starts with the trade. Let's produce some bricklayer guys. Let's have some gyps guys, and let's bring some here in Canada, because it's not going to happen, I think, without resolving this crisis of workers.
Katie, your closing thoughts.
Yeah, so Deloitte actually published a report recently that showed we could add up to $136 billion to our GDP if we doubled our nonprofit housing stock. And it would pay for itself within 2 years. And part of that is because homelessness is one end of a housing crisis. And I want to make sure we connect those pieces. The housing crisis is affecting middle income and higher income folks. And the housing crisis is leading to people leaving the country or the province or the city in order to try and find affordable housing. You can't have good business if you're not actually able to afford to live in a place. It means less spending money if you're paying, 50, 60, 70% of your income on housing. There are all kinds of impacts that the housing crisis has on our community. And at the end of that is the experience of homelessness. And so long term, we desperately need nonprofit housing to start to fill out more of our sector. But in the short term, encampments, there's a hopeful good news story here. We can get our arms around encampments in about 3 to 4 years. That's what Finland did. A lot of it was focused on the short term, cheaper, faster, housing-focused approach, providing people with a rent subsidy, providing support if they needed it, and getting them into a unit in the private market. That doesn't solve everything overnight, but it gets people housed. And I think well-intentioned approaches right now are actually costing more when you start to put in shipping containers and you spend $2.5 million to buy them and $2 million to operate, as they do in Peterborough. that's for 50 people. In Ottawa, you could, for the much less money, it's about 1.5 million, you could house 100. So I think we need to be really getting our focus back to housing as the solution to homelessness. And there's a whole lot of other pieces. And I've really appreciated everybody's thoughts on the complexity and the intertwining, like Jean-Pierre's comment on the trades and how that affects this, zoning approvals, public land, all of this is part of the solution. But I think in my mind, it starts with that collaboration piece that Jean-Pierre said, and a very strong focus on a housing response. And right now, I feel like we've sort of lost that, and we're really scrambling for short-term solutions that aren't actually solving the challenge, and they're not providing the dignity that people deserve.
Scott, you're in Nanaimo right now on Vancouver Island, a city that has a very, very significant challenge around homelessness. What's your message to them and to us as a closing thought on our panel today?
Well, I guess I would say that I'm actually quite reassured by all the comments that I've heard here today, and I think it's important to point out, like Kate just said, that this is a housing issue, and the crisis that we're in today, its genesis was in the early 70s. It's been brewing for decades, and it's gotten particularly acute now, and it is going to require cooperation. It's a supply and demand issue ultimately. It's a mental health and addictions crisis, and it needs a more coordinated approach. It needs some thoughtful approaches to it. And a one-size-fits-all, top-down approach is not going to be the solution we need. We need to reduce demand overall in our market and increase supply overall in our housing market. And we need to make sure that the public dollars that are invested in housing are invested in the segment of the market or the part of the housing continuum that the private market can't do. And Kate is completely correct. There isn't enough social and supportive housing in our market right now, and we need more of it. And that's it's going to take some time to fix, and there is no silver bullet. But I know that with the right leadership and with the thoughtful ideas and approaches that we've heard here, we can get the job done. But we've got to start now, and it's not enough to have good intentions. As my old pastor used to say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. We need results, and we need to make sure that public money is measured against results.
Well, we spent the last hour talking really on the surface level. It goes so much deeper. We didn't talk about challenges that are that add to the housing crunch with the significant number of people coming into the country. We didn't get a chance to even address issues around, helping those people who are challenged with addiction and safer supply and so on, because it's all part of the mix. But I think that this is a good starting point, and I really thank all of you for taking the time to come and join us, because like you, Scott, I come away from this discussion hopeful that there are people who care and are working to find creative solutions that can help people. Going back to what Jean-Pierre said, like whether it was a mild winter or not, it's still -5 at night, and sleeping outside in those conditions just is not survivable. Thank you all for your time today, and thank you all for who were watching. If you're only just catching us late, the program will be available for you to watch again within the next hour or two. Thank you very much. Good night. Thank you for tuning into Conversations Live, an Oh Boy Productions program. If you enjoyed this conversation, you can find our previous and upcoming episodes at conversationslive.ca. You can also follow us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. Again, thank you. I'm Stuart McNish.